you need to have a clear picture in who is the consumer, who is the end user of the documentation. You might produce different differ editorial styles of content depending on who is the consumer of the documentation, some developers and users, consultants. So it really, for me, documentation needs to bring value, and the value is understanding what are the needs. My way is making sure that I know who the audience is. I try to give a little bit more of context to the content I'm describing, because just often it happens that one specific thing is just described, and without context is really hard to grasp what's going on, what are the correct values, what to expect. So I try to provide a little bit of context, and then I go on writing what is the actual topic, and I try to talk to as many subject matter experts as possible, getting their experience. I try at least to convey their experience inside the content. Having the correct audience is a sort of two-way handshake. You need to imagine what is the what the audience wants, but you cannot isolate yourself in your room and just imagine. You need to actually reach out to people, having a sort of in the case of users, you ask a client if you can have an interview with a couple of random users and see what they are, what are the pain points.
Welcome to the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast, where Gauri Ramkumar of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Today's guest is Federico Marafin, senior technical writer at XTEL. Welcome, Federico. How are you doing?
Great, thanks.
Great. So, Federico, if you can help me understand a bit more about yourself and how did you become a technical writer, your experience so far, that would help us to set the scene and take the conversation further.
Perfect. So, yeah, I will say that everyone in technical writing has a sort of upbringing from different areas. My particular one, I have a master's degree in philosophy. So why IT? Why technical writing? At the beginning of 2020, after a couple of years working within another industry, another area, I had the opportunity to start working as a researcher. I will say a laboratory technician help, and basically it was a European Horizon 2020 project, and in this autonomous driving project, there was this simulator with really complex setup, flare, thermographic cameras, eye tracking, eye movement, lots of sensors. So basically this sort of simulator, experimental driving simulator for studying the autonomous vehicle technology, required documentation. No one did it previously. No one was ready for the task. I was there as a sort of research collaborator. I was also doing content creation, in a sort of technical content creation, so video editing, vector graphics for papers. And so I had the chance to start documenting this behemoth of simulator. So that's why I found that my set of skills, coupled with a keen interest for technology, I found myself fulfilled in creating documentation, making clear processes pop up in a way that were more explicit, more user-friendly, as part of a sort of day-to-day guide on how to operate that machine. And so then I started my journey into technical writing. And after that, I was still living in Spain, in Granada, and I got a job inside Unifor, which is a corporate in Granada, and I had the chance to work with excellent colleagues that made me aware of the surroundings and the ins and outs of documentation. And I was working just in Markdown, so other people were working in with other knowledge management system. And then I moved back to Italy. I'm originally from Italy, and right now I'm working in a SaaS industry and with Document 360, I will say. So
Thank you. Great. Now, when it comes to creating documentation either for a product or for a service, what are the key user needs you consider?
definitely, I will start with identifying um, the consumer of the documentation. So first and foremost, if you start writing content, that's perfectly fine. But for me, you need to have a clear picture in who is the consumer, who is the end user of the documentation. You might produce different kinds, differ editorial styles of content depending on who is the consumer of the documentation, some developers and users, consultants. So it really, for me, documentation needs to bring value, and the value is understanding what are the needs. One of the things that provides value, at least. So my way is making sure that I know who the audience is. I try to give a little bit more of context to the content I'm describing, because just often it happens that one specific thing is just described, and without context is really hard to grasp what's going on, what are the correct values, what to expect, just because a lot of times people take for granted what are the necessary information that are not in the text but are held near what is the content. So I try to provide a little bit of context, and then I go on writing what is the actual topic, and I try to talk to as many subject matter experience expert as possible, getting their experience. I try at least to convey their experience inside the content. It can be videos, it can be written content, can be a mix of the two. So it always depends on what is the objective of sharing this information, what is the audience, and especially I think that plenty of people might see the documentation as a sort of I've done it, I need to do it, and that's it. For me, it's not a personal challenge, but I like to see it as one, in the sense that it's not only about doing something that is required, but going to the extra mile and trying to go to reach the, has it been useful? Was it clear enough? Is the user happy with the result after checking the documentation? And then, of course, creating feedback loops. So that is more or less the way for me.
Great. So just talking about the different audiences you mentioned, Federico. So how do you make sure that your documentation aligns with those varying needs? Because it could be read by different stakeholders, multiple other audiences like developers and customers, right? So how do you know that your documentation is aligning with what they need? Because that's one of the key points you spoke about.
Yes. To be honest, it might sound not that fancy, but being a good listener, in the sense that feedback is key. You need to check, and also you need to make sure that you have follow-ups after the documentation, making sure that there are feedbacks to they can leave feedback, the feedback can reach you, and you then have a robust process into making sure that these feedbacks are evaluated by the stakeholders, by product owners, and having a strong system that is able to convert from a feedback, so from just a text or something you heard in front of the coffee machine, for example, that you can get every single piece of information and have it stored in a way that is shareable, is visible to others, and not just the technical writer or the technical writing team, but external people, developers can have their words. So in this sense, making sure having the correct audience is a sort of two-way handshake.
Mm-hmm.
You need to imagine what is the what the audience wants, but you cannot isolate yourself in your room and just imagine. So that's what's important for me into making sure. So you need to actually reach out the people, having a sort of in the case of users, you ask a client if you can have an interview with a couple of random users and see what are the pain points, what were the correct points. So having a two-way communication channel.
Mm-hmm. So how has this approach or you did mention that understanding the user needs is key to producing the right kind of documentation. How has this change in the approach significantly impacted you while creating the documentation?
I will say that you start with an idea, and usually that idea is more or less in focus. You need to, of course, um, you need to make sure that you are on the right topic, you have spoken with the correct people. So once you have more or less the focus, then you need to consider that your first idea might not be the correct one. So you need to test it against yourself in a sense that you need confidence at the beginning, and then you need to have a little bit of self-doubt, just a tiny bit, in a way
Mm-hmm.
that makes you think, have I mistaken something? Have I misunderstood something? And you, as a sort of QA experience, you need to test your ideas, you need to test what were your initial thoughts against what is reality. So after a sort of brief bullet point of things you need to do, you need to actually check with the product owners and with other people, does it make sense? And if it progressively makes sense, then you sort of know that you are in the right path. So it's a mixture between having to start from a point, and that can be intuition, but then you need to focus that intuition into making sure that is actually relevant content, actually a good idea, talking with others. So again, back to the communication.
Right, very insightful thought there, Federico. Now, what does documentation value mean to you in the context of user experience? Because we spoke a lot about content, how it should be structured for various audiences or recipients.
Mhm.
In terms of user experience, how is it important?
I would like to use an anecdote. So my first OS was Microsoft Millennium Edition. It was not a pleasant experience. It was riddled with bugs, and my first approach to computers was really a not happy experience. I had to troubleshoot a lot. So for me, documentation is providing the necessary knowledge and the necessary information, um, making sure that things go smoothly, in the sense that um, having the chance of working in a complex with a complex software, there are challenges. There are you need to have a lot of cognitive effort into making sure that you are knowing everything, and you know the correct processes, you know the correct workflow, and that can be difficult. So for me, the value is being that is documentation can provide, is making sure that this experience is the most how can I say that? It flows in a sense
Mhm.
that if you find something that you don't know, you know that like you have the chance to, hey, I know that I have a knowledge base. I'm sure that I will be able to sort it out. And in a sense, to have a sort of reliable area where you can figuratively bang your head and then come back to the software itself and say, hey, I know this is hard, but I know a way for making it work. So value for me will be having a sort of ephemeral entity that is aiding you, that you know you can rely, that something that it has your back, basically. You're not lost, you're not helpless, but you can rely on something, or some content, on some technical content of or information that is made in a way that you can count on it.
Okay, great. Now you also, before the meeting, we were talking about conferences and we were talking about attending a few conferences, right? So I'm sure you must be reading quite a lot of resources. So in terms of anything interesting that you can share with the audience today?
Yes, I was I didn't remember like the name of the specific piece, but I made my like I done my due diligence, and basically I would like to shout out to Matt Dodson and in the Write the Docs 2023 Atlantic. Graphs are not trees, a ground-up approach to fixing a doc site. And I found his like the content that he shared extremely interesting, and just as sort of at a glance, he was comparing the sort of architecture that was done in the 60s and in the 50s, the sort of imaginary perfect cities with well-built roads and neighbors and streets, but from a top-down view, from a bird's eye perspective, that makes perfect sense in a sort of creating the content of a document website in a way that is easily like you can find content easily if you are checking on the tree architecture. But
Mm-hmm.
on the like as in real life, those were social experiments that created bad neighborhoods, or in a way that unlivable, not ideal, the contrary of what the original purpose, an ideal environment to live. So in the same way, documents that are not dual linked, that are under I will say someone that has decided for everyone that consumed the documentation a specific structure, that's not organic at all. So in reality, the content and the information is consumed in a different way than a static architecture. And it's interesting. I don't want to spoil too much, but it was a really, really interesting topic.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that. And so when I say documentation, what is that one word that comes to your mind?
I will, I will repeat myself, value.
Value. I thought so. Right. My last question to you today, Federico, is what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Don't be afraid to ask questions, book people time. Like you're going to schedule a lot of meetings. Don't be afraid of that. Be pushy in the sense of um, you need to rely on others into making sure the correct network and information is built.
Mhm.
So it's not lone wolf work, it's a team effort. So don't be afraid to ask people and get information. I don't want to say by any means necessary, but yeah, get information, schedule meetings. Don't be afraid to invest your and other people's time.
Great, great advice. Very well said. because particularly when it comes to documentation, you're relying on multiple stakeholders and a lot of external factors, which which produces a brilliant output from people like you. So thank you once again for being my guest today. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Federico. And once again, all the very best for your future projects and more useful contents that you're going to be creating. And have a lovely day.
Thanks to you. The same.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledge Base Ninjas podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.